Hello, everyone. How you doing today? Yeah, great. It's wonderful to be here. First of all, I'd like to thank this great institution, its staff, and students for welcoming me here today. Thank you for your presence. I am so thankful to be allowed to tell my story. A special thanks go out to Ms. Stephanie Court there for working with me in order to make this part of the event a reality. On Monday, I had the opportunity to view one of the documentaries that was recently made about the Freedom Riders. In fact, the title was Freedom Riders. It's a wonderful film, and I encourage all of you to see it. Not just because I'm aware and know most of the people in it, but it's a good film. Having said that, I'd like to thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for never leaving me and bringing me this far. I greet you all in the name of freedom for all mankind, and I stand here before you as an humble servant of humanity. I'm thankful to be allowed to tell my story. I consider it a privilege. Consider it a very excellent privilege to be worthy to stand here with you today to tell you about some of my civil rights experiences and about my book, Autobiography of a Freedom Rider. I do urge all of you to get the book. It would put into perspective the entire content of what I'm about to bring before you today. Give you an understanding, a better understanding of some of the events. Let me just take 1 second or two and thank Ms. Natalie Bell, co-author of the book, Autobiography of a Freedom Rider. She's not able to be here, but had it not been for her help, the book would have never been published. By her being an experienced writer, on a couple of occasions, she had the idea that the manuscript needed to be tweaked a little bit, changed it a little bit here and there. But that's when we almost terminated our relationship. Take my stuff and change it. I had to realize that she was the expert. Once I got that in my head, everything flowed quite well. My book is the story of my experience working in the early days of the civil rights movement. I revisit thoughts and feelings about relatives and friends who had been maimed at the hands of hate-mongering people. That would later motivate me to do what was then the unthinkable, and that was to go out and protest in the street against the injustices that had been perpetrated against Southerners at that particular time, and especially black Southerners. The book should be included in the curriculum of all colleges and universities, of which many colleges and universities currently make the book a part of their curriculum. It attracts worldwide readership as it relates efforts of foreigners in Mississippi in the movement struggle. The book even answers the age-old question, where do we go from here? If some of you have never been involved in the struggle for civil rights, I promise you your life will be changed after reading this book with sincerity. Today, however painful it may be, I speak of the foot soldiers of the movement. If I was able to do so, I'd have all of them standing around this podium today, because they are the ones upon whose shoulders I stand and on whose shoulders many of you out there in the audience stand today. It remains a tragedy that the story of the foot soldiers and what we call the little people, the ones on the front lines, and the ordinary foot soldiers of the civil rights movement has not been told. While it is true, quite true, that the story of the leaders and icons of the movement, such as Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and others, those stories have been presented to the public. But efforts of the least of these foot soldiers, the little people, their efforts languish in invisibility. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Thomas Madison Armstrong, born and raised in South Mississippi, in a rural Jefferson Davis County. I'm trying to get this working right here. Finally got it, okay. I was born and raised in a neighborhood called Lucas, Mississippi. It was an all-black community, actually developed in 1807 by two carpenter slaves. After the emancipation, they wanted their children to have less contact with Caucasian of the area and slave masters as possible. So they developed that town of Lucas. And Lucas actually had only about 3 or 4 stores in it. Had a train depot, had a gas station, a couple of entertainment facilities, and that was about the size of it. But there were about 100 homes surrounding that center of town. My dad was a logger. So according to the standards of Mississippi, he did quite well in the logging business. And so I really didn't have a lot to want for, okay? My mother was a housewife at that particular time. My great-grandparents voted in the 1867 general election. Our home in Lucas, Mississippi became somewhat of a community meeting place by many individuals in the area simply because most of my relatives were instructors at the local elementary and high schools in the area. But before I finished high school, I began to realize that something wasn't right. Something wasn't right in my community. But I went on to attend Tougaloo College. And Tougaloo College kind of taught me that a couple of things. One, that freedom was around the corner, but it wasn't looking for me. I had to go find it if I wanted it. And so I decided that I wanted it. And so, along with the academia, Tougaloo increased my ability to think for myself. So faced with all of this, I had to help change things. I began to look around me, and to my dismay as a teenager, I saw Caucasian people sitting at the front of the bus while I had to sit at the back. If whites were standing and I was sitting, I had to get up and let them have my seat. So way back, a long time ago, back in 1705, rules and regulations were put in place by the state of Mississippi to control the lives of slaves everywhere. Those laws were updated in 1865 and 1866. However, the only change that took place where they changed the name from slave to Negroes. So those codes lingered in our environment in the state of Mississippi all the way up until the passage of the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, 51 years ago. So seeing all of this, I began to look around me, and to my dismay as a teenager, I could still see the lingering effects of those slave codes. Get off the sidewalk when 2 or more whites approached. Sketch your foot on a white sheet of paper if you wanted to purchase shoes. Could not try on clothes. Had to wait in line till all whites were served. Could not sit at the front of the bus. Interracial marriages were banned. Could not testify against Caucasian in court. At the stores in my hometown, we had to wait until all of the Caucasians were served and had finished purchasing their items and had paid for their items. We had to wait for all of that before the clerk took our money. We were not allowed to try on garments. At the movie house, Caucasians sat downstairs while blacks had to go into the side door and sit upstairs. Excuse me. On the lawn of the courthouse, there was a water fountain with the white and black sign attached. And if you happen to be black and drink out of the fountain with the white sign attached, you were subject to ridicule at the very least. Some were even beaten for doing so. So those were some of the things that I felt that we had to change. But what happened was somebody was watching us. Someone was watching us, individuals that was considered to be the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission. The Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission was a spy organization. It was created in 1956 by the Mississippi legislature and sponsored and directed by the governor of the state. They were watching every move we made. That commission was a propaganda machine that reinforced and funded Mississippi Caucasian opposition to the civil rights movement at that time, funded by the state. They hired state investigators and local informants, black and white, to monitor us and to disrupt any civil rights activity that took place over the state. Sovereignty Commission was aware of every major event that had anything to do with civil rights in the state of Mississippi. As I said, they hired black informants. They blackmailed as well as paid money to black Mississippians to infiltrate the meetings of civil rights activists. They tried everything within their power to stop the black vote, to stop integration, keep tabs on all outside influences coming into the state of Mississippi, and to identify all who had any sympathy whatsoever to the cause of freedom. Information gathered was passed on to the police department, and in turn passed on to the White Citizen Council, a racist organization, and subsequently passed on to the Klan, whose sole purpose was to intimidate and harass. Ladies and gentlemen, there are some civil rights veterans who would suggest that Mississippi blacks did not help themselves move forward toward freedom until the Freedom Riders or other organizations came into the state. But I submit to you that our fight for freedom began to intensify with the return of soldiers from the many wars that had taken place and were in effect. Right in our community of Lucas, two individuals, Curtis Hooker and Avery Toney, two of the nicest young men you'd ever want to meet. But harsh fate allowed them to be born in Jefferson Davis County, Mississippi, where they were relegated to the life of farmers and pulpwood workers. Some say that it was saving grace that they were 1941 draftees into World War II. They went on to fight in the Battle of the Bulge. They fought through the frozen Andean forests and mountainous region of Belgium. They fought in France. They fought the Battle of the Rhineland, which was the battle most costly to this country. Those brothers were community brothers, uncles, and fathers. But what they did, they brought courage back that they maintained in the military and brought it back and gave it to the young people of our community. Because they knew that if they kept on speaking to us, if they kept on believing in us, praying for us, and pushing us, that someday we would find a way to break through that Mississippi Jim Crow system. So some of you, few of you here, voted in some of our elections. You have to realize that in Mississippi in the 60s, people were being killed for trying to do exactly what you did, vote. People were killed in Mississippi for trying to help people register to vote. In Mississippi, people were killed just for talking to each other about voting. That's what the real atmosphere was. There's something wrong with rigging the election. There's something wrong with the way gerrymandering is conducted. As you read your newspaper and listen to your news, and you hear the word gerrymandering, your ears should perk up. The only reason gerrymandering is used is that one side of the political process redraws the districts to favor them in terms of the voting process. So they feel that they are not getting enough votes in a particular district. So what do they do? If they are in the majority, they redraw the districts, okay, to include voters that's favorable to them. What was being done to the many of the little people of our area is a travesty. Many little people that I knew, that I worked with in the movement. Jesse Harris, Joan Trump-Powell, MacArthur Cotton, Ann Moody, Betty Poole, Jimmy Travis. Many of these were shot. Some were killed. Willie Peacock survived a shotgun attack. Jimmy Travis survived being shot in the neck with a machine gun, all while trying to help people register to vote. These little people, they were the sharecroppers, the tenant farmers, the domestics, teachers, students, and many small businessmen of the community. They were the history makers, and they were just like you, 70,000 strong, who made the civil rights movement a success. But there was something unique about that entire group. And that was that they consisted mostly of young people. 19, 18, 17, 16, all the way as young as 14 years of age, who participated daily in the civil rights struggle, sometimes with the same battle cry as Patrick Henry. Give me liberty or give me death. It was known that in 1960 in Mississippi, less than 2% of blacks were registered to vote. Less than 2%. Some counties, there were no registered black voters at all. I had a difficult task to perform. One of my mentors, a gentleman by the name of Medgar Evers, was actually spearheading the voter registration campaign. And he assigned us to go out into the small towns of the state of Mississippi, in my case, the southern area of the state of Mississippi, to the hamlets and small town, and teach blacks the Mississippi voter registration process. That requirement within itself was a dangerous one, because why? People were getting beaten up and killed for doing that. But we had to know if blacks would vote if they could vote. And the only way that that would happen is that we go out and give them the tools to do so. But those of you who voted in the last election, no longer will it be enough for you to say I voted, or just wear that little I voted sticker, you know. The question now becomes, who did you take to the polls with you? It's difficult for me to find a way to express to you the sincerity of our plight today. Too many people have died for your right to vote. The vote should be free and without restriction for all Americans, period. It is un-American for anyone to try to place restrictions on the right to vote. They just don't love America. Ladies and gentlemen, when I joined the movement, I knew many martyrs of the movement. Of several that I knew about, there was George Lee. George Lee was a minister, and he owned a printing press. He used his pulpit and his printing press to encourage blacks to vote. Powers to be in his hometown of Winona, Mississippi, came to visit him. And they asked him to cease registering blacks to vote. He refused, and he was killed. Lamar Smith lived only 30 miles from my hometown. Lamar Smith was killed in Brookhaven, Mississippi courthouse lawn in broad daylight, holding a fistful of absentee ballots. 3 individuals who were arrested for his murder, one covered in blood, was never prosecuted, even though there were more than 12 witnesses. Of course, later there was Medgar Evers, murdered in Jackson, Mississippi on June 12, 1963 by Byron D. LeBeck in front of his home. There are many others that died in the struggle for freedom. How can I forget Viola Liuzzo, Caucasian young lady that was transporting freedom fighters from Montgomery, Alabama to Salem, Alabama when she was killed. 3 little girls in Birmingham there. They were killed with the bomb that blew up the church. Perhaps the greatest factor involved in my decision to participate was the inspiration of Medgar Evers in the spring of 1960. I happened to be able to visit a mass meeting. Mass meeting were meetings where the community provided instructions to individuals as to what was coming about in terms of civic engagement projects during the coming weeks and days. I listened to Medgar moderate that meeting, and one of the things that he told us about was that the year just prior, 1,000 individuals had been taken from the rolls of Jefferson Davis County, my county, where I lived. He happened to mention a few individual names. Some of them were relatives of mine. Some were acquaintances. At the end of that meeting, he asked for college students to go out into these small places and teach that voter registration process to blacks. So I felt I had no choice, that I had to volunteer for that. As I said, Medgar was killed in front of his home. He fought in both France and Germany in World War II. He received a Purple Heart. He graduated from Alcorn College. He was the bravest man that I knew. Medgar was shot and killed 17 days before his 38th birthday because he wanted equality for blacks. Today, Federal Post Office and a 689-foot United States Navy ship bear his name. It was James Bevel, one of the lieutenants of Martin Luther King's SCLC group, that raised the bar of hope in the civil rights movement by lowering the participation age. And some of the youngsters now were as young as 18 years old. 8 years old. And one of the things, as I was a young man, was ice cream. I loved ice cream. Every time I see an ice cream cone, I think of segregation. And the reason for that is I missed my bus going to school one morning. And I had to go catch a ride to school, and I did so, and the gentleman let me out in front of an ice cream parlor in my hometown. And in Mississippi, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, 8:30, 9 o'clock, it's already hot. So I walked up to the window and I said, "May I have an ice cream cone, please?" And he looked at me and said, "What's the matter, boy? Can't you read?" And I said, "Of course I can read." He said, "Well, read that sign up there." And the sign, sure enough, was there, and it said, "Whites only." So he took his finger and pointed around to the side window and said, "Go around to the side window." I did. And as I walked around there, I saw a 50-gallon steel drum half filled with garbage and swarming with flies. And I immediately turned around and went on to school. And as I told my family about it, they said, "Don't worry too much about it. We just won't participate and won't frequent that establishment anymore." Mrs. Eileen Quinn was a lady from MCCOMB, Mississippi. MCCOMB, Mississippi. And one day, Mrs. Quinn arrived at the governor's mansion to protest the seating of congressmen from districts where blacks were not allowed to vote. She had her children with her, carrying small U.S. flags. Right there you see her son, Anthony Quinn, who happened to meet up with our 200-plus pound policeman. Mrs. Quinn had instructed Anthony to hold on to his flag. That's what he were trying to do there. Of course, the police took his flag, and he ended up being disappointed. If you ever see images of the civil rights movement of Mississippi, you will see this picture included. There's two of my classmates on the right and the social studies instructor on the left, John Salters, having a Woolworth sit-in at a lunch counter there. In a couple of our hometowns, Gulfport and Biloxi, Mississippi, resort areas of the state, the beaches and waters were sacred. Blacks could not even walk on the beach. Definitely could not swim in the waters. Schoolmate of mine, Lawrence Gilliard, beaten twice in the same day, trying to register people to vote. They used dogs to attack us. Many days. We made two dogs famous. Their name, as you can see, Happy and Rebel. They were trained to tear your clothes off. Well, anyway, what's ironic about it, they were trained by a young man by the name of Harry Narrott of Springfield, Missouri. And he was a former Nazi stormtrooper who trained killer Dobermans to guard Adolf Hitler's airport. I don't think Mississippi intended to hire him. But anyway, they did. And he trained his dogs well. There are others that lost their lives after I left the state of Mississippi. Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andy Goodman. In Philadelphia, Mississippi, they were fellow Corps members who were arrested by the deputy sheriff and then released in the hands of Klansmen, who promptly murdered them and buried them in an earthen dam simply because they were civil rights workers. The country should make sure that the history books have their facts straight. Most of the history books today only tell half the story. Portions of history of higher education is often ignored and lost. Our history books often ignore the trials of black higher education integration efforts, as well as the inclusion of nonviolent resistance in the civil rights movement. Some of those who fought to break those chains of stagnation and integrate Mississippi schools of higher education included Medgar Evers in 1954, when he attempted to enter the University of Mississippi. He was denied simply because he was black. Clyde Kennard, a young man 40 miles from my hometown, attempted to enter the University of Southern Mississippi. In 1957, he was denied and thrown into jail. They sent him to the Mississippi State Penitentiary for doing so. Clinton King, in 1958, tried to get into the University of Mississippi. He was denied because he was black and thrown into a mental institution. I tried to enter into all-white Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi, along with 10 other blacks. And according to some Millsaps Caucasian students who were there, they picketed their administration, trying to get that administration to allow me to become enrolled there. But in spite of having their support, the Millsaps College told everyone that they did not have enough students to open that class, and they needed 10 students. Well, we had 10 students. We had 11 students in the lobby trying to get into that class. I'm sure you've heard about James Meredith. 1961, his efforts to enter into the University of Mississippi. He was denied in 1961, but with the help of 350 U.S. federal marshals, he was allowed to enter the University of Mississippi in 1962. A riot ensued. 2 people died. We believe that children should be educated, not incarcerated. Our schools have not done enough to help. There is something wrong when students do a bang-up job in their schoolwork, in their projects, and receive a red, white, and blue ribbon for their efforts, and other students who shoot 100 free throws get 4-year scholarship to college. Something wrong with that picture. We need to stop it. So what will be your role in that solution? Most of you have heard about the Freedom Riders. Do you have any idea what year that they first began? Let's say what? Give me a year. 1937. A little too soon, but great. I wished it had. 1947. What happened in 1947, there was a young lady by the name of Irene Morgan. Irene Morgan lived in Virginia, and she traveled to Maryland to work every day. And she traveled via a bus. One day, she decided she didn't want to sit in the back of the bus. So she sat up front. And what happened is the driver asked her to get up and give her seat to a white individual. She refused. Driver called the police. Police arrested her. She went to jail. What happened later was an organization known as the NAACP heard of her case, joined with her, and took that case all the way to the Supreme Court, where in 1946, she won that case. What did that mean? That means that segregation on any interstate travel vehicles was unconstitutional. But what did the state of Mississippi do? They said, we don't care what the Supreme Court says. We're going to maintain our customs that we've had for over 300 years. We're going to continue to do what we have been doing all the time. There was a young man by the name of James Farmer right in Chicago, Illinois. James Farmer was the head of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, a civil rights organization. And he and a friend of his, James Peck, decided that it was time that the United States live up to its promise made by the Supreme Court. They decided to create a journey of reconciliation, a freedom ride, traveling from Washington, D.C. through the upper states. It made it as far as South Carolina. They were beaten, and many of them were thrown on the chains gang. So the organization CORE decided that it was too risky to make that trip. So they called it off. 14 years later, 1961, Mississippi and Alabama, Georgia, and all the southern states still maintain segregation in those facilities. So James Farmer and James Peck, his friend, decided to do it again. So this time they decided to go into the southern states of the country, traveling through Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, on the way to New Orleans, Louisiana. They left in two buses. One took the route through Birmingham, Alabama, and one took the route through Anniston, Alabama. In Birmingham, they were beaten up. The bus that went to Anniston, Alabama, it was firebombed. They barely made it out of the buses alive. Once again, CORE decided that it was too dangerous for them to continue that ride. They called it off. But there were students from Nashville, Tennessee, students just like you, who decided that they could not call it off. Because if they did call it off, they felt the segregationists would have won. So they went, a group of them, one group went to Anniston, Alabama, one group went to Birmingham, with the intention of taking that ride through Jackson, Mississippi, all the way into New Orleans, Louisiana. Well, they did make it through Jackson, Mississippi, but the governor of the state and the attorney general had made a deal that they would arrest them immediately once they arrived in Jackson. I was in school at Tougaloo College, 10 miles away. We at school had been watching their progress ever since they left Washington, D.C. When they came to Jackson, we actually thought they'd all be killed. The reason we thought that they would be killed because the president of the White Citizen Council and people in authority of the Klan had contacted the Justice Department and told them actually that they were going to kill them all once they arrived in Jackson. Now, so we felt at Tougaloo College, we felt that we had to do something as a student body. And what we decided that we could do was to get into jail with them, the Freedom Riders, when they came. And we did that. We did it because we felt that Mississippi powers to be would not kill everybody in there simply because we lived in the state of Mississippi. The battle cry for the segregation, even the politicians and especially the governor of the state of Mississippi, was that all of his black folks were happy in Mississippi. very happy. And if it had not been for the outside agitators coming into the state, Mississippi would have no problem. We disagreed with that, and we had to let him know that. And so we went down to the bus station there in Jackson, Mississippi, and signed up to that great project known as the Freedom Riders. 4 individuals were together, made that trip. That's me on the left. I had hair then, so in case you didn't recognize it. My classmate Mary Harrison on the right, and 2 individuals, a brother and a sister from a nearby town of Raymond, Mississippi, made that trip to the bus station. We walked in, took our seats. We already had tickets to New Orleans, Louisiana. There were about 25 policemen standing around the walls. As we walked in, they had been notified that we were coming. And we took our seats a few minutes. About 5 minutes later, the chief of police of Jackson, Mississippi came in and told us that we had to leave. We were disturbing the peace. And I stated that we had not spoken to anyone and we did not believe that we were disturbing the peace. He said, well, you have to leave anyway. I said, we have tickets to go to New Orleans, Louisiana. He said, well, I don't care where you have tickets to go. You have to get out of here. And he arrested us right there on the spot. We never got on the bus that day. Would not even let us on the bus. We're taken down to the city jail, Jackson City Jail, where we were interrogated for about 3 days. It was kind of interesting in the sense that every time they'd ask me a question, I'd ask them one. I was scared to death. But anyway, they didn't really do anything to us that day. They just slapped us upside the head, push the chair out from under you, little things like that. So that wasn't anything. But my case took on a greater significance when organization NAACP took my case and joined it up with a case known as Broadwater versus Mississippi. And in that case, which they took all the way to the Supreme Court, 2 dual cases, that one that I spoke of, and the Attorney General taking the case to the Interstate Commerce Commission. And that put pressure on the Supreme Court as well as the Interstate Commerce Commission. And what they did, they both issued rulings that all of the signs, black and white signs throughout the South, promoting segregation had to come down, had to be removed. It was because of the Freedom Riders that you can go in and have lunch at any lunch counter in the South today. It was because of the Freedom Riders that all of the signs came down. On November 30th, 1961, I was asked by Congress for Racial Equality to go into a town called MCCOMB, Mississippi, and pick up some Freedom Riders that was coming in and get them out to safety. Along with a classmate of mine, MacArthur Cotton, we made that trip. And as usual, our first step was to talk to the chief of police of this small town. So we asked for his protection for us and the Freedom Riders, and he couldn't provide that. So he said, no, you own your own. So about 30 minutes later, the chief of police had his office about a half block from the bus station. He walked with MacArthur Cotton and myself to the bus terminal. And there was something eerie about that. And the fact that nobody was on the street, no cars, only 3 policemen we saw on the entire block. A few minutes later, the bus came around the corner. 6 Freedom Riders came out, went into the bus terminal. My friend MacArthur Cotton went in behind them. I stayed outside the door to monitor the situation. Chief of police left me and went across the street to the pool hall. About 2 minutes later, after the Freedom Riders had been in for 4 or 5 minutes, all of the doors in the surrounding establishment opened up. People just flooded out with sticks, bricks, bats, and everything else that they could get, rushing toward the entrance to the bus terminal. The editor of the local paper, last name Emmerich, estimated that there were about 400 people in the street. As I was standing to the door, actually people rushed past me and went 3 doors down where there were 3 Time Life photographers. Just beat them half to death. Threw them through the plate glass windows of the stores. While that was taking place, I indicated to my friend MacArthur Cotton and the Freedom Riders inside that it was getting a little hairy outside and it should be trying to get out of there. They did come out, and we walked through that mob of people. Freedom Riders got pushed around. I think my friend MacArthur Cotton got hit a couple times. Other than that, nothing happened to us. You know, I credit that to my mom. She used to always say, well, you know, if nothing would have to happen to you. You know, she was an old-fashioned lady, you know. Nothing's going to happen to you, you know. Your mother was a Christian, your grandmother was a Christian, and so forth. You don't have nothing to worry about. Yeah, all right. Yeah, standing in there, I had a song. And I advise all of you to find you a song. Find you a song that will support you throughout troubled times. My song was, Precious Lord, Take My Hand. And I was not kidding. You know, when I was standing in the midst of hate-spewing mobs, that song would come to me. And I, sure enough, would hope the Lord would take my hand and lead me out of that place. He did. He did. So we opened up Mississippi Closed Society. We opened up the educational system. We opened up the political process in Mississippi. We made unheard of changes in its tightly controlled caste system in the state. So sometimes people spend hours on the question that, where do we as individuals, where do we go next? To me, that's kind of a simple question. And I say, if your special interest leads you on a political path against or for popular issues of today, take that path. And with your zeal and commitment towards justice, make it better for everyone. The common good should be the center of all of our public policy. It is your generation that is creating a new movement. In the process, you need to challenge the old racist segregation strategy, wherever you find it. That old strategy is to divide and destroy. Divide by hate, race, fear, and propaganda. So you see, you have a lot of work to do, a lot of work to do. Our children, first of all, starting in elementary school, they need to have standards for all of the children. Principals can't discipline one set of kids and call the police on another set of kids for the same infraction. It's just not right. And if you don't think it's happening, follow your student advocate for one day. You will see more than you expected. You in this room can make America better if everyone following in the footsteps of the early foot soldiers. You have the talent to do so. You have within you the light that shines in the direction of freedom. So you need to let that light shine. You need to speak up when situations happen like that what happened to Sandra Bland. You need to speak up. You can begin the fight by pressuring your congressman to help make education a constitutional right for every man, woman, and child in this country. You must become informed voters. Racism is as old as America. It is cloaked in the bosom of inequality and privilege, oppression, and the suffering of one group against the suffering of another group. Racism is a sanctuary for the stupid and the ignorant. It seeks to divide and destroy. It is the enemy of justice and goodwill. How deeply is it embedded? Racism is the blueprint of discord in every aspect of American life. Think about it. Everything you deal with, everything you touch is soaked in racism. Your country club, churches, parks, nursing homes, preachers, enemies, heroes, landlords, policies, practices, restaurants, country clubs, teachers, role models, leaders, family, friends, spouses, your lovers, all influenced by racism. In this country, every iota of life is saturated with racism. If you say nothing, nothing changes. Okay? Other side out there, the haters are beating the bushes all the time. If you say nothing, nothing changes, and they win. So what do? You got to analyze yourself. Analyze yourself, first of all, and look for the surprised, erupted thoughts that come to you when you're in many situations. You develop thoughts, first-hand thoughts about situations as you see them. Look within the depth of the deep within you. Check for reality and be realistic. Develop a plan about your unnoticed life action. Put it on an index card if necessary. And after a communicative setting, review that card. Check your minuses and your pluses. So maybe it's oversimplified, but it's true. One of your entertainers said it best, Michael Jackson. Take a look at yourself in the mirror and make a change, because it starts with us. Do you need to be sanctioned by someone to tell you what's right? I don't think so. What you see on the screen there is a group of my classmates and I on a Friday evening at our chaplain's home, determining what protests we were going to participate in on Saturday and Sunday, the following 2 days. What you'll notice there is no one is smiling in that picture. They're not smiling because they don't know what's going to happen to them Saturday morning once they get out there on that picket line in Jackson, Mississippi. Are you here today? When you wake up in the morning, I'd like for you to take a look in the mirror. Ask yourself 2 questions, just 2, and you don't have to answer them. One is, who am I? Who am I? Talk to yourself. Who am I? What am I doing here? Why was I put here on this earth? When the opportunity presents itself, let those questions surface. Hopefully you decide that your role in society is to enjoy life to the fullest, make a positive contribution, encourage and uplift the less fortunate ones, and help others to benefit from your experiences, both good and bad. You can save this country, the whole planet. You have it in your hand, You have it in your head, and you got it in your heart. You're getting the best background information, foundation here at COD. Make use of it. I've been to other junior colleges, other colleges. Their leadership program is nowhere up to par that compares whatsoever with yours. Take advantage of it. We can save this country, the whole planet. Like I said, all we have to do is use our hands and let our light shine to the world. Thank you so much for listening.